My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie, and I'm 34 years old. Right now, I'm standing on the balcony of my private beachfront estate in Malibu, watching something incredible unfold. For 10 years, my family has treated me like I don't exist. They banned me from family gatherings, ignored my calls, and acted like I was some kind of embarrassment to the Thompson name. But today, they just walked into my house. They don't know I own it. They think they're staying at some fancy rental for their annual family reunion. And when my concierge asks them who they are, well, you'll see what happens. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe, because what my family doesn't know about my success is about to blow your mind. Growing up in the Thompson family meant living up to impossible standards. My father, Harold, owned Thompson Industries, a massive manufacturing company that had been in our family for 3 generations. We lived in this sprawling mansion in Connecticut, complete with manicured gardens and a circular driveway that screamed old money. My mother, Beverly, was obsessed with maintaining our social status. Every conversation revolved around what the neighbors would think, what would look good in the society pages, and how to preserve the Thompson reputation. I had 2 older siblings who fit perfectly into this world. My brother Charles was the golden boy, destined to take over the family business. He went to Harvard, played lacrosse, and could charm anyone at the country club. My sister Dorothy was the perfect socialite daughter. She attended all the right charity galas, married into another wealthy family, and knew exactly which fork to use at every formal dinner. Then there was me. From the time I was little, I was different. While Charles studied business reports and Dorothy practiced piano, I was sketching in my room or writing stories. I questioned why we had to live according to everyone else's expectations. I wanted to create something meaningful, not just inherit something that already existed. The breaking point came when I was 16. During a family dinner, I announced that I wanted to study art in college instead of business. The silence that followed was deafening. My father actually laughed, which was worse than if he had yelled. My mother looked mortified, like I had announced I wanted to become a circus performer. Charles smirked and said art was a nice hobby, but not a real career. Dorothy just shook her head in disappointment. From that moment, I felt like an outsider in my own home. Every family gathering became a reminder that I didn't fit their vision of what a Thompson should be. They would make subtle comments about my choices, compare me unfavorably to my siblings, and treat my dreams like childish fantasies that I would eventually outgrow. College was supposed to be my escape, but it only widened the gap between me and my family. Instead of attending an Ivy League school like Charles and Dorothy, I chose a small liberal arts college in Vermont that had an excellent graphic design program. My parents were horrified. They saw it as a step down from the Thompson legacy, a sign that I was settling for mediocrity. During my 4 years there, my family's visits became increasingly rare. They would show up for major events, but always seemed distracted or eager to leave. I remember my graduation day so clearly because it perfectly summarized how they saw me. They arrived 2 hours late, missed my speech as the recipient of the Outstanding Achievement Award in Visual Arts, and left immediately after the ceremony because Charles had some important work event back in Connecticut. I watched other families celebrating their graduates, taking photos, going out for special dinners, and I felt completely invisible. My parents barely acknowledged my award, and my siblings spent the entire time checking their phones and complaining about the drive. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I was moving to California after graduation, with or without their approval. The reaction was exactly what I expected. My father called it irresponsible. My mother worried about what people would think about their daughter moving so far away. Charles said I was running away from reality, and Dorothy predicted I would come crawling back within 6 months, when I realized how hard the real world was. But I had saved every penny for my campus jobs, sold my car, and bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco. I had exactly $800 in my bank account and a dream to work in the creative industry. Looking back now, it was terrifying, but it was also the first time I felt truly free to make my own choices. The early signs of being cut out of the family started almost immediately. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. I wasn't invited to Charles's engagement party, which I only found out about through social media. When Dorothy got married, I was seated at the very back of the church with distant cousins I barely knew, and I wasn't invited to any of the pre-wedding events. Slowly but surely, I realized that my family saw me as an embarrassment to the Thompson name. I wasn't the successful businesswoman or the perfect socialite wife they could brag about at the country club. I was just Maggie, the daughter who threw away her privileged upbringing to chase impossible dreams in California. My early days in San Francisco were a complete shock to my system. I rented a tiny studio apartment in the Mission District that was smaller than my walk-in closet back home. The walls were paper thin, the heater barely worked, and I could hear every conversation my neighbors had. But for the first time in my life, I was completely independent. I got a job at a small tech startup called TechFlow, working as a junior marketing associate. The company was developing a social media management platform, and they needed someone who understood both design and digital marketing. The salary was laughably small compared to what I was used to, but I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. My coworkers became my chosen family. Janet from accounting would bring me coffee when I was working late. Rose from product development taught me about the tech industry and helped me understand how startups actually functioned. Eugene, one of the developers, became my closest friend and would patiently explain the technical aspects of our platform so I could create better marketing campaigns. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued my ideas and creativity. They didn't care about my last name or my family's money. They cared about whether I could help the company grow and succeed. It was intoxicating to be judged purely on my own merits. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family continued to deteriorate. Phone calls became monthly, then quarterly, then almost non-existent. They stopped asking about my job or my life in California. When I tried to share my excitement about TechFlow's growth or a successful campaign I had created, their responses were polite but disinterested. The holiday invitations stopped coming around 2019. I would see photos on social media of family gatherings where everyone looked happy and complete without me. Charles got married to a woman named Sandra, and I found out through a Facebook post. Dorothy had a son named Gerald, and I learned about it weeks after he was born when my mother mentioned it casually during one of our brief phone conversations. I tried to maintain the connection by sending thoughtful gifts. For my mother's 60th birthday, I spent weeks creating a custom photo album filled with family memories and had it professionally bound. I never received any acknowledgement that she had received it. When my father had a minor health scare, I called immediately. But Charles told me that the family would handle everything, and I didn't need to worry about it. That's when I realized I had been completely erased from their lives. They had moved on without me, and they seemed perfectly content with their decision. The Thompson family was Harold, Beverly, Charles, Dorothy, and their respective families. Maggie didn't exist in their world anymore. The pain of being rejected by my family was devastating, but it also fueled my determination to succeed. I poured all of my energy into my work at TechFlow, often staying at the office until midnight and coming in on weekends. My dedication paid off in ways I never could have imagined. TechFlow's social media management platform was revolutionary for its time. It allowed businesses to manage multiple social media accounts, schedule posts, analyze engagement, and track their return on investment, all from one dashboard. My marketing campaigns for the platform started going viral, bringing in major clients who had previously been using much more expensive solutions. The company's growth was exponential. We went from 12 employees in a cramped office to over 200 employees in a modern downtown building. I was promoted to marketing manager, then director of marketing, and finally chief marketing officer. With each promotion came stock options and profit-sharing agreements that I barely understood at the time, but signed anyway. I was working 80-hour weeks, traveling constantly for conferences and client meetings, and building a reputation in the tech industry. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably working harder than anyone in my family ever had, but they had no idea because they had stopped asking about my life years earlier. The loneliness was crushing sometimes. I would see my coworkers talking to their families on the phone or getting excited about going home for holidays, and I felt completely untethered. But I had Janet, Rose, Eugene, and a growing circle of friends who became my chosen family. They celebrated my successes, supported me through difficult times, and never made me feel like I had to be anyone other than myself. By 2021, TechFlow was being courted by major investors who saw the potential for an initial public offering. The platform had millions of users, hundreds of enterprise clients, and was generating serious revenue. As the CMO, my stock options were substantial, but I still thought of them as just pieces of paper rather than real wealth. The IPO happened in early 2022, and everything changed overnight. TechFlow's stock price opened at $28 per share and closed the first day at $45. My stock options were suddenly worth $12 million. I literally sat in my apartment staring at my brokerage account for hours, unable to process the numbers. For the first time since leaving Connecticut, I had serious money. Not just a good salary, but generational wealth. I could have called my family and told them about my success, but I realized I didn't want their validation anymore. Their opinion of me had been formed years earlier, and no amount of money was going to change the fact that they had chosen to exclude me from their lives. Instead, I decided to invest in real estate. I wanted something stable and tangible, something that would hold its value, regardless of what happened in the tech industry. I started researching high-end properties in areas where my family would appreciate the prestige, not because I wanted to impress them, but because I understood quality and value. That's when I discovered the Malibu estate that would change everything. The property listing was breathtaking. $8.5 million for a sprawling beachfront estate with 7 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, an infinity pool, private beach access, and staff quarters. The main house was Mediterranean style, with soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and terraces that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. There were also 2 guest cottages and a fully equipped staff house. The previous owner was an elderly movie producer who was selling due to health issues. The property came with a full management team, including a concierge named Patricia, a groundskeeper named Luis, housekeeping staff, and a chef who could be called in for special events. It was turnkey luxury at the highest level. I arranged to view the property on a Tuesday morning in March. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew I had to have it. The ocean views were spectacular. The architecture was stunning, and the sense of privacy and exclusivity was exactly what I had been looking for. This wasn't just a house. It was a statement. I made an offer that same day for the full asking price, with a cash purchase through an LLC I established called Pacific Sunset Properties. The seller accepted immediately, and within 6 weeks, I owned one of the most beautiful properties in Malibu. I was 33 years old and owned an estate that most people could only dream about. The decision to keep the purchase anonymous was strategic. I didn't want my family to know about my wealth, and I certainly didn't want them to know I owned property in an area they would consider prestigious. I instructed Patricia and the rest of the staff to continue operating the estate as they always had, renting it to appropriate clientele for special events and extended stays. The property had always been popular for family reunions, corporate retreats, and milestone celebrations. The previous owner had established relationships with high-end event planners and had a waiting list of clients who returned year after year. I saw no reason to change this arrangement, and the rental income more than covered the property taxes and maintenance costs. I visited the estate monthly, staying in the owner's private wing that guests never saw or accessed. It included a master suite, home office, private terrace, and separate entrance. I could be on the property without anyone knowing I was there, which gave me the perfect opportunity to ensure everything was being maintained to my standards. The staff was exceptional. Patricia had been managing luxury properties for over 20 years and ran the estate with military precision. Luis had been the groundskeeper for a decade and knew every plant, tree, and system on the property. The housekeeping team was discreet and thorough, and the security system was state-of-the-art. For the first time since leaving Connecticut, I felt like I had truly made it. I owned something beautiful and valuable that was entirely mine. No family money, no inheritance, no help from anyone who had ever doubted me. Just my own hard work and smart decisions. I had no idea that my family had been renting this very property for their annual reunions for the past 3 years. The call came on a Wednesday morning in June. Patricia phoned to discuss a reservation request from a repeat client who wanted to book the estate for their annual family reunion in July. The event planner had specifically requested the same dates they had booked for the previous 3 years, and they were willing to pay premium rates for the peak summer season. As Patricia read me the details, my blood ran cold. The reservation was for the Thompson family reunion, 15 guests, 3 generations, 5 bedrooms required. The primary contact was listed as Dorothy Thompson Mitchell, and the billing would be handled through their event planning company in Connecticut. My first instinct was to cancel the reservation immediately. I could have Patricia call and say the property was no longer available, or that there had been a scheduling conflict. It would have been simple and clean, and my family would never have known I had any connection to their disappointment. But as I sat in my home office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a different idea began to form. What if I let them come? What if I allowed them to stay in my house, enjoy my property, and make themselves at home in luxury that I had earned through my own success? What if they never knew they were staying in the home of the daughter and sister they had discarded? The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. They would spend a week in my house, posting photos on social media about their amazing accommodations, bragging to their friends about their exclusive getaway, never knowing that their success was actually my success. I told Patricia to confirm the reservation and to treat them exactly like any other high-paying clients. premium service, attention to detail, and complete discretion. I also made arrangements to be present during their stay, ostensibly for a routine property inspection, staying in the owner's wing where they would never know I was there. The weeks leading up to their arrival were a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I found myself checking their social media constantly, watching as they posted about their upcoming vacation to their exclusive Malibu estate. Charles posted photos of his twin daughters getting excited about their beach vacation. Dorothy shared her packing list and asked her friends for restaurant recommendations in the area. My parents posted a formal announcement about the family gathering, mentioning that Charles would be receiving an important business announcement during the trip. I realized they were probably planning to officially name him as the sole heir to Thompson Industries, completing my removal from the family legacy. Through their posts, I learned details about their lives that they had never shared with me directly. Charles was married to Sandra, a woman from another wealthy Connecticut family, and they had 5-year-old twin daughters named Rebecca and Rachel. Dorothy was married to Frank, a successful lawyer, and their teenage son Gerald was apparently an excellent student and tennis player. My parents looked older in their recent photos, but they were still actively involved in the business and their social circle. They seemed happy and fulfilled, surrounded by the family members who had met their expectations and made them proud. As July 15th approached, I made my final preparations. I arranged to take time off work and drove down to Malibu the day before their arrival. I settled into the owner's wing and tested the security cameras that would allow me to observe their stay without being detected. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen, but I knew that seeing my family in person for the first time in a decade was going to be emotional. I also knew that they had no idea who they were dealing with, and that knowledge gave me a sense of power I had never experienced before. They arrived in a caravan of luxury vehicles at exactly 2 o'clock on July 15th. I watched from the hidden security monitors as 3 black SUVs pulled into the circular driveway, followed by a silver Mercedes sedan. The vehicles alone probably cost more than most people's houses, but I knew that kind of display was important to my family's image. Patricia and Luis were waiting to greet them, along with 2 housekeeping staff members who would help with luggage and initial room assignments. I watched my family emerge from their vehicles, and my heart started racing as I saw them in person for the first time in over a decade. My father looked distinguished in his expensive casual wear, his silver hair perfectly styled even after the flight and drive from LAX. My mother was impeccably dressed in designer resort wear, her jewelry subtle but clearly expensive. Charles had developed the confident bearing of a successful executive, and his wife Sandra looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Their twin daughters were adorable, with matching sundresses and excited expressions as they took in the grandeur of the estate. Dorothy looked elegant and polished, every inch the wealthy socialite. Her husband Frank had the bearing of a successful attorney, and their son Gerald looked like a typical affluent teenager, slightly bored but trying to be polite. What struck me most was how comfortable they all seemed with luxury. They expected to be catered to, anticipated that their needs would be met immediately, and showed no surprise at the level of service they were receiving. This was simply how they lived, and how they expected to be treated. Patricia began the standard orientation, explaining the property amenities, house rules, and contact information for any needs that might arise. I watched my family nod along, asking questions about restaurant recommendations, spa services, and transportation options. They treated Patricia and the staff with polite indifference, the way wealthy people often treat service providers they consider beneath their notice. Within the first hour, the demands began. Charles complained about the thread count of the sheets in the master bedroom and requested immediate replacement with higher quality linens. Dorothy criticized the kitchen facilities and wanted to know why a private chef wasn't automatically included in their package. My mother wanted premium champagne available at all times, and my father needed a secure location for some business documents he had brought along. I watched Patricia handle each request with professional grace, making arrangements to fulfill their demands while maintaining the standard of service the property was known for. But I could see the subtle signs of stress in her demeanor, and I knew my family was being more demanding than the typical high-end clientele. That evening, they gathered for dinner on the main terrace overlooking the ocean. I could hear their conversation through the audio system, and what I heard made my blood boil. They were discussing family matters, business decisions, and future plans as if I had never existed. When my mother mentioned something about our 3 children, she was clearly referring to Charles, Dorothy, and Dorothy's son, Gerald. But the comment that nearly broke me was when Charles raised his wine glass and proposed a toast to family loyalty and the people who truly understand what the Thompson name represents. The entire table laughed and agreed, clearly enjoying their sense of superiority and exclusivity. They spent the next 2 days treating my property like their personal playground, posting dozens of photos on social media and tagging the location as our family estate. They hosted video calls with friends back home, showing off the views and amenities as if they owned everything themselves. They used my infinity pool, my private beach, my luxury furnishings, and my staff's services, while congratulating themselves on their excellent taste and successful lives. The breaking point came on the third day of their stay. I was working in the owner's wing when I heard shouting coming from the main living area. Through the security cameras, I could see Charles screaming at Patricia, while his 5-year-old daughter Rebecca stood nearby crying. Rebecca had been playing in the living room when she accidentally knocked over an antique ceramic vase that was part of the property's art collection. The vase was worth $15,000 and had been a centerpiece of the room's decor for years. It was clearly an accident, the kind of thing that happens when children are playing in an unfamiliar environment. But Charles was treating it like a personal attack on his family's reputation. He was demanding that Patricia personally pay for the replacement, threatening to sue the property management company, and promising to leave scathing reviews that would destroy the estate's reputation. His voice was getting louder and more aggressive with each sentence. Dorothy joined the attack, berating the entire staff for what she called inadequate supervision of the common areas. She suggested that the property wasn't suitable for families if valuable items were left where children could access them. Sandra was trying to comfort Rebecca, while also expressing her embarrassment about the incident. My parents stood by watching the verbal assault without intervening, seemingly content to let their son handle the situation with whatever level of aggression he deemed appropriate. Frank looked uncomfortable but said nothing, and Gerald seemed mortified by his family's behavior. Patricia remained professional throughout the tirade, apologizing for the incident and explaining the standard procedures for handling accidental damage. She offered to contact the insurance company and work out a reasonable settlement, but Charles refused to listen to any reasonable solutions. When Patricia's phone rang and she answered with, "Pacific Sunset Properties, this is Patricia," I realized she was calling me for guidance. I had instructed her to contact me immediately if any serious issues arose, and this clearly qualified. I answered the phone and listened as Patricia quietly explained the situation, asking for direction on how to handle the damage claim and the guest demands. In the background, I could still hear Charles yelling about incompetent staff and threatening legal action. That was the moment I decided it was time to reveal myself. I had planned to observe their entire stay anonymously, but watching my brother verbally abuse my staff over an accident caused by his own child was more than I could tolerate. I told Patricia I would handle the situation personally and would be down to the main house within 5 minutes. I changed into professional attire, took a deep breath, and walked out of the owner's wing for the first time since my family had arrived. The walk through the connecting hallway felt like the longest journey of my life. I was about to face my family for the first time in over a decade, and they had no idea what was coming. As I approached the main living area, I could still hear Charles berating Patricia and making increasingly ridiculous demands. I walked into the room and said simply, "Is there a problem here?" The silence that followed was absolute. My entire family turned to stare at me, their faces showing a progression of emotions from confusion to recognition to complete shock. Charles stopped mid-sentence, his mouth literally hanging open. Dorothy gasped and took a step backward. My parents looked like they had seen a ghost. Patricia looked relieved to see me but confused about how to handle the situation. She clearly hadn't expected the property owner to be related to the guests who were causing problems. Charles was the first to recover his voice. "Maggie, what are you doing here? This is private property. You can't just walk into someone's house." That's when Patricia spoke up, her voice calm and professional. "Family, I'd like you to meet Margaret Thompson, the owner of this property." The second silence was even more profound than the first. I watched as the reality of the situation slowly sank in. My mother's face went completely white. Dorothy sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Charles looked like he might be sick. My father was the first to speak. "That's impossible. Maggie works at some little computer company. She doesn't have this kind of money." I smiled and replied calmly. TechFlow went public last year. I was the chief marketing officer with substantial stock options. I used my proceeds to invest in real estate. "This is one of my properties." Charles demanded proof, so Patricia produced the ownership documents and LLC paperwork that clearly showed my name as the sole owner of the estate. She also explained that I had been staying in the owner's wing throughout their visit, conducting routine property inspections. The look on Dorothy's face as she realized all of her social media posts had been bragging about staying at her estranged sister's house was priceless. She immediately started calculating how many people had seen her posts and what she would have to do to control the narrative. My parents seemed to age 10 years in the span of 5 minutes, as they processed the fact that their failed daughter was apparently worth millions of dollars and owned property that exceeded anything they had ever achieved. But Charles, true to form, couldn't let go of his anger about the broken vase. Even faced with the reality that he was staying in his sister's house, he continued to demand compensation and threaten legal action. I looked around the room at my family, taking in their shocked faces and defensive postures. After a decade of being treated like I didn't exist, I finally had their complete attention. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt surprisingly calm and clear about what needed to happen next. I addressed Charles first, since he was still holding broken pieces of the vase and making threats about lawsuits. Charles, your daughter accidentally broke a vase while playing in my house. Accidents happen, especially with children. The vase was insured, and I'm not concerned about the cost. But your response to this situation has been completely inappropriate. You've spent the last hour verbally abusing my staff over something that wasn't anyone's fault. He started to interrupt, but I held up my hand and continued. Dorothy, you've been treating my employees like servants since you arrived. You've made unreasonable demands, criticized their work, and shown them no respect whatsoever. These are good people who take pride in maintaining this property, and they deserve better treatment. Dorothy's face flushed red, but she remained silent. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, you raised me to believe that how we treat people says everything about our character. You taught me that wealth comes with responsibility, and that we should always show respect for others regardless of their station in life. Have you forgotten those lessons, or do they only apply when it's convenient? My father looked uncomfortable but tried to deflect. Maggie, we didn't know this was your property. If you had known, you would have what? Treated my staff better? Been more respectful of my belongings? Or would you have simply not come at all? Because you can't stand the idea that your failure of a daughter might actually be successful. The silence stretched uncomfortably as my family struggled to process both the situation and my words. Sandra was still comforting Rebecca, who was confused about why everyone was upset. Gerald looked like he wanted to disappear, and Frank seemed to be studying the floor with intense concentration. Beverly finally spoke up, her voice shaky. Maggie, we had no idea you had done so well for yourself. We always knew you were smart and talented, but we thought you were still working at that little startup company. That little startup company is now worth over $2 billion, Mother. I helped build it from 12 employees to over 500. My marketing campaigns brought in the clients that made our IPO possible. But you wouldn't know that because you stopped asking about my life years ago. Charles couldn't resist jumping back into the conversation. So you have money now. Congratulations. But money doesn't buy class, Maggie. It doesn't change the fact that you walked away from your family and your responsibilities. I stared at my brother for a long moment before responding. You're absolutely right, Charles. Money doesn't buy class. Class is treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances. Class is taking responsibility when your child breaks something instead of blaming others. Class is acknowledging when you're wrong and making amends for your behavior. I'm giving all of you a choice, I continued. You can leave my property immediately, forfeit the remainder of your reservation, and go find other accommodations for the rest of your reunion. Or you can stay, follow the house rules, treat my staff with respect, and we can try to have a civil conversation about our family. The house rules were simple, I explained. Apologize to every staff member they had mistreated. Pay for any damages without complaint. Treat my employees like the professionals they are. And absolutely no more social media posts claiming ownership or association with my property. Charles immediately started packing, muttering about family loyalty and respect. He clearly couldn't handle the reality that his little sister was more successful than he was. And he certainly couldn't bring himself to apologize to people he considered beneath his station. Dorothy tried to negotiate, suggesting that perhaps we could work out some kind of arrangement where they could finish their stay without admitting any wrongdoing. She was obviously panicking about how to explain the situation to her social media followers, who had been seeing her posts about their family estate. My parents attempted the guilt approach, reminding me that family should stick together and that I was being unreasonable to hold grudges after so many years. They suggested that perhaps we could all start fresh and move forward as if nothing had happened. But I was done accepting half measures and conditional love. You made your choice about our family relationship 10 years ago, I told them. You decided I wasn't worth your time, attention, or respect. You celebrated holidays without me, shared milestones without including me, and treated me like I had never existed. Now you want to pretend that was all a misunderstanding? Beverly started crying, a mixture of genuine regret and embarrassment about being confronted with their behavior. Harold's business mind was clearly calculating my net worth and wondering how they had so completely misjudged my potential. Frank finally spoke up, addressing his wife. Dorothy, I think we should apologize and try to make this right. Your sister has every right to be upset with how she's been treated. But Charles had reached his limit. He announced that he was leaving immediately, that nothing had changed between us, and that he refused to be lectured about family values by someone who had abandoned her responsibilities years earlier. As my family packed their belongings in awkward silence, I felt a strange mixture of victory and sadness. I had proven my success and confronted their treatment of me, but I hadn't gained back the relationship I had lost. If anything, I had confirmed that the gap between us was unbridgeable. My final words to them as they loaded their luggage were simple. You're right, Charles. This doesn't change anything between us. But that's because I stopped needing your approval years ago. I built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, rather than what I can do for them. As their caravan of luxury vehicles pulled out of my driveway, I stood on my terrace watching them leave. Patricia joined me, expressing her gratitude for how I had handled the situation and her admiration for my composure throughout the confrontation. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. The immediate aftermath of my family's departure was surprisingly peaceful. Patricia and the rest of the staff were incredibly supportive, expressing their appreciation for how I had stood up for them and handled the difficult situation. Patricia told me that in her 20 years of managing luxury properties, she had never seen an owner intervene so directly to protect their employees. Louis shared that he had sensed something different about me from my first visit to the property, noting that I treated everyone with respect and genuine interest in their work. The housekeeping staff thanked me for defending them and expressed their pride in maintaining my beautiful home. Over the following weeks, I decided to spend extended time at the Malibu estate rather than returning immediately to San Francisco. The property felt like a sanctuary where I could process everything that had happened and plan my next steps. I worked remotely, taking video calls from my private terrace and handling tech flow business from my home office overlooking the Pacific. My chosen family rallied around me during this time. Janet, Rose, and Eugene drove down from San Francisco for a long weekend, and we spent hours talking through the entire situation. They had watched me struggle with my family's rejection for years, and they were amazed by how I had handled the confrontation with such grace and strength. You didn't need their validation, Rose pointed out as we sat by the infinity pool. You built something incredible without them, and their opinion doesn't change what you've accomplished. Eugene added, the fact that they couldn't apologize or acknowledge their behavior tells you everything you need to know about who they really are. Janet, ever practical, helped me think through the financial and legal implications of what had happened. My family now knew about my wealth, and there was always the possibility they might try to stake some claim or create complications. We decided to have my attorney review all of my asset protection strategies and ensure everything was properly structured. During those quiet weeks at the estate, I also started working with a therapist via video sessions from my beach. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in family estrangement and helped me process the complex emotions I was experiencing. The confrontation had been empowering, but it had also brought up years of buried pain about feeling rejected and unwanted. What you did took incredible courage, she told me during one of our sessions. You stood up for your values and your boundaries without seeking revenge or trying to hurt them. That shows tremendous personal growth. Through our conversations, I began to understand that my family's rejection had never been about my worth or my choices. It had been about their own limitations, their inability to see value in anything that didn't fit their narrow definition of success. Their obsession with appearances and social status had blinded them to the person I actually was. I also realized that the decade I had spent away from them hadn't been wasted time. It had been necessary for me to develop my own identity, build my own success, and learn to value myself independent of their approval. If I had stayed in Connecticut and tried to fit their mold, I never would have discovered my own capabilities or achieved the level of success I had reached. The healing process wasn't linear or simple. Some days I felt strong and confident about my choices. Other days I grieved for the family relationships I had lost. and wondered if there might have been a different way to handle things. But gradually, I began to feel a sense of peace about the situation that I had never experienced before. I decided to use my wealth and success in ways that aligned with my values, rather than simply accumulating more for its own sake. I established a scholarship fund for students from modest backgrounds who wanted to pursue creative careers, but couldn't afford the education or initial financial struggles that often come with those paths. I also began opening the estate occasionally for charity fundraisers and nonprofit events, using my beautiful home to support causes I cared about. It felt good to share my success with people who were working to make a positive difference in the world. The deeper lesson I learned from the entire experience was that sometimes being cast out is actually being set free. My family's rejection had forced me to become independent, self-reliant, and confident in my own judgment. It had pushed me to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or blood ties. Most importantly, I learned that I didn't need their approval to live a fulfilling life. The validation I had been seeking from them for so many years was something I could only give myself. Once I truly understood that, their opinion of me became irrelevant to my happiness and success. As I sit here now on my private beach, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, I sometimes wonder if my family will ever truly understand what they lost when they chose to exclude me from their lives. But I've realized that their understanding isn't necessary for my peace of mind. I built something beautiful without them, surrounded myself with people who love and value me, and created a life that brings me genuine satisfaction and joy. In the end, that's the only victory that really matters. What do you think about family relationships and the importance of setting boundaries? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building the life you truly want. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they don't need anyone else's approval to be successful and happy. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you were born into. I hope you find the courage to live authentically and surround yourself with people who truly see your worth.